I want to share some thoughts, perspectives, and insights with you about this budget deal that just happened. And as we know, we have the Trump administration proposing a new budget. Last Friday, in the wee early morning hours, we know that the Senate and the House of Representatives both passed a 2-year budget deal, and it was signed therein by the president into law. But one of the big concerns that I have about this budget deal is that it will increase spending in Washington, D.C. Therefore, it means it will increase the debt and it will increase the deficits of these United States of America. We will see a return back to the trillion-dollar type of deficits that we saw in the first 4 years of the Obama administration. Now, this is something that we thought, having majorities in the House and Senate with Republicans, we would not see. And the thing that is most disconcerting with me is that we continue to see a debt clock that clicks higher, higher, and higher. So one of the things that we have to come to understand is the budgeting system of the United States of America and how our budget is broken down. There are two sides of our budget. One side is the mandatory spending side, and the other side is the discretionary spending side. On the mandatory spending side, that's where you have Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and the net interest of the debt. Some people refer to this as entitlement spending. I just rather say it by the doctrinal name, which is mandatory spending. And that means that no one is doing anything to get this mandatory spending under control. It does not go through any type of budget or appropriations process. And right now, our mandatory spending for the United States of America is somewhere between 65 and 66% of the budget of our federal government. The other side, the discretionary side, therefore, is about 35 to 34%, and it is broken down further into two sides, which is the defense discretionary and the non-defense discretionary, mostly the domestic spending. What we continue to see happen in Washington, D.C. is the most important part of the functions and the duties and responsibilities of the federal government is to provide for the common defense. But yet that is often held hostage to do more and increase spending on the domestic side. And that's exactly what happened this time. If we don't understand that we have a U.S. Army that is smaller than pre-9/11 levels, a United States Marine Corps that's at World War I levels, a United States Navy that is the smallest we've seen for our naval force, surface warfare ships since 1917, about 280 some odd ships. Just for a matter of comparison, the Reagan administration had us up to close to 600 surface warfare vessels. Now, the Navy will tell you it needs about 405 to be able to meet all the responsibilities. And you know we've seen many accidents at sea with our ships running into other ships. Lack of training, lack of maintenance, lack of sufficient crews. And then we also know that some 50% of our combat aviation fleet is non-mission capable. I think it's really important right now that we start to look at how we get to a system of dealing with our budget in the three parts that it is. Dealing with our budget separate for defense discretionary. Dealing with our budget for non-defense discretionary. And someone has to have the political will and courage to deal with our mandatory spending side. You know, right now we're on a path that, let's say the interest rate on our debt would increase by a percentage point or a percentage point and a half. You could see sometime in the future that the net interest of our debt that we pay will be greater than the budget that we spend on defense. And some of you will say we spend too much on defense. I would beg to differ. We spend too much on the bureaucracy of the Department of Defense. We spend too much on the weapons procurement and acquisition programs that we have out there. But when you look at the trigger pullers, the men and women that are deployed on the ground, and the tools that they need to be successful when we deploy them into these combat zones, that's where we're cutting. You don't see any cutting coming from the higher headquarters like a Pentagon or some of these other places. And so that's where we need to focus on. But think about this. If we continue to see our mandatory spending side of our budget, the Social Security, the Medicare, the Medicaid, the net interest of the debt, continue to go unchecked, there will come a time when all the revenues of the United States of America will be taken in by the mandatory spending side of our budget. Therefore, think about this. We could see a time in our future where we will have to borrow money in order to fund our national security. And who wants to be in a position in these great United States of America where provide for the common defense, that responsibility of our federal government is outsourced for funding? That's the path that we're on, because we continue to have what is called a baseline budget system where every year the federal government is increasing their spending. And now we see that they're going to continue to do that without any type of restraints or fiscal responsibility. Instead, they should move towards a zero-based budgeting system where every single budget cycle, we need to see them start from zero. Every single program, every single funding expenditure needs to be justified, not just continued on. And furthermore, not just continued on at an increased rate. When they talk about cutting spending in Washington, D.C., which they don't do very well anyhow, all they're doing is cutting the rate of the increase. So I think it's very important that we deal with those separate pots, respective, instead of trying to lump them all together. Because we need to understand what are the priorities for our federal government. And right now, I don't think that promoting the general welfare, which has now become providing welfare, should be the main priority of our federal government. There are many places. You can start with the waste book that gets produced every single year, where we can find those programs that can be eliminated from the federal government's budget. But that is not what is happening. I don't agree with what Senators Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell crafted over in the Senate. I don't agree with the fact that the House passed it, because it's just going to continue to put this country on a path of fiscal ruin. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is not what we want to pass on to our children and our grandchildren.